In a small Alabama church, the candles were lit, the guests were seated, and the pastor stood tall at the altar. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, his wedding day. But within minutes, blood would stain the holy ground. Because when Pastor James looked into the eyes of his bride, he discovered a truth so disturbing, it shattered his faith and ended in murder. This is not just another wedding day story. What unfolded inside that Alabama church was a nightmare no one could have imagined. A pastor, a bride, a secret that should never have reached the altar. And when the truth was revealed, it sparked a chain of events that would leave an entire congregation haunted forever. Before we dive into this shocking case, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way, you never miss the darkest and most twisted stories we uncover here. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I want to see our community connected from all over the world as we piece together the chilling puzzle behind crimes like this one. Pastor James Holloway was a man people trusted. In a small Alabama town, he built his life around the church. Every Sunday morning, his voice echoed through the wooden beams of the chapel, preaching faith, family, and forgiveness. To his congregation, James was more than a pastor. He was a father figure, a counselor, a man who carried the community on his shoulders. Behind the pulpit, however, James carried a loneliness that gnawed at him. Years earlier, his wife had walked out, leaving him to raise their only son alone. That son grew up distant, often rebellious, drifting further from James's world of sermons and hymns. Still, James prayed for reconciliation, hoping one day they could bridge the gap between father and son. As the years passed, James found comfort not in family, but in the devotion of his followers, and among them was a woman who captivated him, a woman who brought warmth back into his life. Her name was Angela. She was younger, vibrant, and seemed to give James a reason to smile again. No one questioned their relationship. No one doubted their love. The congregation celebrated it as a blessing, a chance for their pastor to find happiness once more. But what no one in that church knew was that Angela carried a secret, a truth so devastating, it would turn the pastor's dream of love into a nightmare of betrayal. Angela was a mystery to most in the town. She appeared in James's life suddenly, almost as if out of nowhere, and within months, she had become the center of his world. To the congregation, she was polite and respectful, always dressed modestly, and always sitting quietly in the front pew, eyes locked on James as he preached. But away from the church, Angela lived a life that very few had ever glimpsed. Behind her gentle smile was a history she never shared. Angela had moved frequently from one small town to another, leaving behind fragments of stories that never quite added up. Old friends recalled how she avoided questions about her family, how she always seemed nervous when conversations turned personal. She carried herself with elegance but also with a weight, as if she was hiding from something in her past. James never asked too many questions. For him, Angela represented hope, a second chance at happiness after years of solitude. Their relationship grew quickly, so quickly that some whispered it was rushed. But James dismissed the doubts. To him, Angela was an answered prayer. He believed that God had finally rewarded his patience and faith. What James could not see was that Angela's path to his church had not been guided by fate. It had been shaped by choices, secrets, and shadows she hoped would remain buried forever. And among those shadows was a connection so shocking, so unthinkable that if James ever discovered it, his entire world would collapse. And yet, as the wedding day drew near, the truth was inching closer to the surface. A secret that tied Angela not only to James's heart, but to his blood. The morning of the wedding was filled with anticipation. The church bells rang softly across the Alabama town, calling neighbors, friends, and church members to gather for the celebration. The old wooden pews filled quickly, the air thick with perfume, excitement, and whispered blessings. For many in attendance, this was more than a wedding. It was a chance to witness their pastor, the man who had guided them through births, funerals, and Sunday sermons, finally step into joy of his own. James stood at the front, dressed in a crisp suit, his Bible resting nearby on the altar. His hands trembled slightly, but not from nerves. It was the weight of the moment, the thought that perhaps after years of heartbreak, God had finally given him peace. He smiled at familiar faces in the crowd, though deep inside, a small unease gnawed at him. Angela arrived moments later, radiant in white, her veil casting a glow across her face as she walked down the aisle. Guests leaned forward, whispering about how beautiful she looked, how blessed James must be. The choir hummed softly in the background, filling the room with a sacred calm. From the outside, it was perfect, almost too perfect. But James noticed something in her eyes as she drew closer. Behind her smile was a flicker, a shadow he could not name. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of devotion. He brushed it aside, convincing himself it was nothing more than the nerves of a bride. Yet his heart raced faster with every step she took toward him. As she reached the altar and their hands touched, the church fell silent. For a moment, James felt a rush of warmth, as if his prayers had finally been answered. But within that silence, buried under the joy, a truth was waiting to erupt. A truth that would turn a holy ceremony into a crime scene. The ceremony began like any other. The choir faded, the guests sat quietly, and James lifted his Bible with steady hands. His voice carried through the church as he recited verses about love, unity, and the sacred bond of marriage. Every word felt heavy with meaning, as if he was not just speaking to his congregation but reminding himself of the promise he was about to make. Angela stood before him, her veil trembling slightly as the air shifted in the room. She smiled, but it was a fragile smile, almost forced. A few of the guests noticed and whispered, but James pressed on. He read the vows with a conviction that silenced the doubt in the room. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing could go wrong. Then came the moment of pause, the exchange of vows. As James reached for Angela's hand, he caught a glimpse of something. A birthmark, small but distinct, etched on her wrist. His heart stopped. That mark was one he had seen before years ago on a child he once held in his arms. His own child. His son. Confusion ripped through his mind. Memories flooded back. The hospital, the night his wife had walked away, the broken family he had tried so hard to mend. He stared at Angela, disbelief twisting into horror. His grip on her hand tightened, his breathing grew unsteady. Angela's eyes widened. She knew at that moment that the truth had finally found her. The congregation watched in silence, unaware of the storm erupting inside their pastor. To them, it looked like a moment of emotion, perhaps nerves or overwhelming joy. But for James, it was the unraveling of everything he believed. His bride was not just a stranger with secrets. She was connected to his past in the most forbidden way imaginable. James's chest rose and fell as if every breath was a battle. His fingers trembled against Angela's hand, his eyes locked on hers, searching for denial, for any sign that what he believed was a mistake. But Angela's silence told him everything. Her smile had vanished, her lips quivered, and in her eyes there was something he had never seen before. Fear. The pastor's voice cracked as he stumbled over the next line of the vows. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another, thinking the pressure of the moment was too much for him. But in James's mind, the church was spinning. He thought of his son, of the nights he prayed that God would bring him back home. And now, standing at the altar, he wondered if God had answered in the most twisted way possible. Angela tried to steady her voice, softly whispering, "James, please." But it only deepened the storm raging inside him. Her plea was not one of love, but of desperation. And James could feel the walls of his faith cracking. The holy ground beneath him no longer felt sacred. It felt cursed. The congregation waited, eyes fixed on their pastor, expecting him to continue, expecting a smile, expecting joy. Instead, they saw sweat drip from his brow and his grip tighten until Angela winced. A silence spread through the room, heavy and suffocating. Something was wrong, and though no one could name it yet, they could feel it in the air. At that moment, James was no longer leading a ceremony. He was standing at the edge of collapse, torn between holding the secret inside or exposing the horror that had just shattered his world. And with every passing second, his control was slipping. The silence inside the church grew unbearable. James's throat tightened as he tried to push the vows forward, but the words turned to ash on his tongue. His eyes darted between Angela's face and the birthmark on her wrist, the one that screamed of blood ties, of betrayal. Finally, his voice broke through the silence, low at first, then sharp enough to cut through the air. "Who are you, really?" he demanded, his words echoing across the chapel. Gasps rippled through the pews, guests leaning forward, unsure if they had heard him correctly. This was no longer a wedding. This was a confrontation. Angela's eyes filled with tears, her veil trembling as she whispered back, "James, not here. Please, not like this." Her voice cracked with panic, but it only fueled the fire inside him. His hand shook violently as he pulled away, pointing at her, his face twisted with rage and heartbreak. The congregation froze. Mothers clutched their children. Men exchanged uneasy glances, no one daring to move. The choir sat in stunned silence, their hymns silenced by the storm unraveling before them. This was their pastor, the man they had trusted with their souls, now standing broken, his faith stripped bare at the altar. James's voice rose, trembling but fierce. "You think you can stand before God's altar and hide the truth from me?" he shouted, his words shaking the very air. The guests recoiled, the weight of his fury pressing down on them. And in that moment, Angela knew. The secret she had buried, the lie she had carried into this church, had been ripped open, and there was no turning back. The air inside the church snapped like a tightened string. James's chest heaved, his eyes wild, and in one swift motion he grabbed the heavy Bible from the altar. The congregation gasped, some rising from their seats, unsure whether to run or to pray. Angela stepped back, her veil sliding from her head as tears streamed down her face. "James, stop, please," she begged, her voice breaking under the weight of fear. But the man standing before her was no longer her fiancé, no longer the pastor the town had admired. He was a father crushed under the weight of betrayal, a man who believed the altar he stood on had been defiled. With trembling hands, James reached inside his coat and revealed a gun. Screams tore through the chapel as mothers shielded their children and men ducked behind the pews. Chaos erupted, but James's focus never left Angela. His voice shook with rage and heartbreak. "You are not my blessing. You are my curse." Angela raised her hands, pleading, her words drowned by the pounding of James's rage. He stepped closer, the gun aimed at her chest, his body trembling as if torn between pulling the trigger and collapsing into despair. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The choir held their breath, the congregation frozen in terror, waiting for the choice that would change everything. The shot rang out, one single deafening sound that shattered stained glass and silenced prayers. Angela collapsed against the altar, her white dress blooming red as the church filled with screams. James stood frozen, his hands shaking, the gun slipping from his fingers. The holy place where countless weddings and baptisms had been held was now a crime scene, a sacred ground, forever stained with blood. The echoes of the gunshot seemed to linger long after the smoke cleared. The congregation erupted into chaos, screams and sobs filling the sacred hall. Mothers clutched their children and rushed for the doors. Others collapsed where they stood, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. The smell of gunpowder clung to the air, mixing with the scent of flowers meant for a wedding that had turned into a funeral. Angela lay motionless at the altar, her blood pooling against the polished wood where so many vows of love had once been spoken. A silence settled over her body, broken only by the cries of those who dared to step closer. The sight was too much for many. Some fled, but others remained frozen, their faith shattered alongside the image of the man they once called shepherd. James did not move at first. The gun had slipped from his hands, clattering onto the church floor. But he stood rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on Angela as though waiting for her to rise again. His lips moved in a silent prayer, but no words came. His shoulders shook, and for the first time in years, the man who had always seemed unshakable appeared broken beyond repair. The wail of sirens soon cut through the chaos. Police rushed through the doors, weapons drawn, commanding everyone to step back. Parishioners pointed to the altar, their voices trembling as they identified the man they never thought they'd fear. Officers closed in on James, shouting for him to get on the ground. For a moment it seemed he might resist, his body trembling with the weight of rage and sorrow. But then, as if drained of all strength, he sank to his knees and placed his hands behind his head. The sight was haunting. The pastor, once a man of God, was led away in handcuffs from the very altar where he had preached forgiveness. The congregation wept as they watched him disappear into the flashing red and blue lights outside, and in that instant, the church that once symbolized hope became the stage of one of the darkest betrayals the town had ever seen. The church doors closed that night on a scene no one would ever forget. A place meant for love and unity had become a graveyard of shattered faith. Pastor James Holloway's story serves as a haunting reminder of how secrets, when buried too long, have a way of rising at the worst possible moment. In the end, the man who once preached about forgiveness and eternal love was left to face the weight of his own actions. Angela's secret was gone forever, her life cut short in the very place she thought she would begin a new chapter. And the congregation, once devoted to their pastor, now carried the scars of witnessing the unthinkable, a murder at God's altar. For the town, the echoes of that single gunshot never truly faded. It raised questions about faith, about trust, and about the hidden lives people lead when no one is watching. To this day, the story remains a dark stain on Alabama's history, a warning that sometimes the most terrifying tragedies don't happen in the shadows. They unfold in broad daylight, in places we believe are safe. If you have stayed with me through this story, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Let me know what you think about this case and how something so sacred could turn into something so tragic. And if you want more true crime stories told just like this one, make sure you subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss the next case. Every day we dive deep into the darkest corners of human nature, bringing you stories that will keep you thinking long after the video ends. This was the story of the Alabama pastor, the bride who carried a devastating secret, and the murder that silenced a congregation. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and I will see you in the next story.